here's the question. Why can't women do open marriages like men are allowed to? And you see, this is a fascinating question, because it's one of those things you're not allowed to say, because the day and age is becoming. But honest, like, if you look at even the scientific data across species, don't just pick any species, across species, female species are monogamous. Now, that doesn't mean that they wouldn't mind. It doesn't mean they wouldn't mind. You see, often you see women saying, "Oh no, we're polygamous," but I genuinely still don't believe it. I don't believe that women are polygamous. That they maybe, because of the culture, are thinking, or they maybe sold the idea that, sure, like, I wouldn't mind. Like, let's say, for example, they have a husband and they feel that, oh, Salman Khan or Brad Pitt is a handsome actor. I wouldn't mind sleeping with him. Let's say from a fantasy perspective, and they're thinking that defines polygamy. It doesn't. That's not what polygamy is, because that's just a fantasy, and that's just the thought of an escapism. It's not a realized reality. If a woman was to think, I would live in relationships with multiple men, like live in with them, females across species are not designed that way. And generally speaking, the reason it's not across species is because it would just be a disaster. And that's why evolutionarily they've been wired that way. And people don't, I think the problem is you're not allowed to say it now, because people feel, oh, that's like you're not telling. Look, male species are wired that way. They're programmed. It's in the settings. It's not. Now, that doesn't mean that all men have to all be polygamous. It doesn't have. Okay, they all are polygamous, whether they admit it or not. But whether they will be living in polygamous relationships that probably isn't the case in many of the relationships. It's not like that. But they are wired that way. So, and you would see that. And it's, the several times I've got into these discussions with people, and they'll say, well, no, that's not true. Women think like that as well. You think, well, no, they don't. I tell you, as a fact, they don't. Maybe you might get the odd some person but we can only speak by averages, by generally speaking across the population. So, for example, let's say you take it to ad absurdum. And this is where often because it's by peripheralizing something, you can see the boundaries very clearly. So let's say, now this may sound absurd, but you take it to a fantasy level. Now, let's say a man was to be given this kind of hypothetical option that he was to be submerged amidst 100 women sexually, one man to be submerged in that as a hypothesis. To most men, heterosexual men, that would be, and even if they weren't heterosexual and it was running in correlation with their example, I think they would still agree with the hypothesis. But in this example with heterosexual men, they would see that as an absolute fantasy. And women would see that if it was the opposite, one woman was to be submerged amidst 100 men. Most women would see that as utterly, bizarrely disgusting and abominable. They would see that as they would see it as an utter violation. See, because you peripheralize the matter, and then you can see clear borders, and you work backwards in understanding the kind of the concept. So it's not about trying to tell people what they can or cannot. It's just defining this is a reality. It is it's a reality in nature. And the truth is, it is a reality. We are only a continuity of other species. We're not, humans are still in hayawan. We are still hayawan natiq. We are still just creatures. And to assume that we somehow radically defy all the laws of nature and instinctual laws of nature, it's a hubris of its own kind. But yeah, so that's interesting, I would say.